AI thing a bit. We often hear about it as, futuristic, maybe a bit abstract, almost like magic.
Right. But the sources we dug into for this deep dive, things like AI, labor, data, and state power, and this really detailed data-driven timeline, they paint a very different picture.
Yeah, much more grounded, right? Like connected to the physical world, systems of extraction, labor, even centuries of history.
Exactly. And today, for this quick overview, we wanted to pull on just one thread from that.
Yeah.
How these old ideas about classifying people, well, they're kind of tangled up with modern AI.
And how that connection gives AI systems this significant, often hidden power. Okay, so where do we start with those historical roots?
Well, it goes way back. Think about historical figures who were obsessed with classifying people based on how they looked or acted. Samuel Morton, for instance, back in the 1800s.
Craniology, right. Trying to link skull size to intelligence.
Yeah, and the sources are clear. This wasn't just flawed science. It was explicitly used to justify things like slavery, real-world oppression.
Then you have others, like Alphonse Bertillon.
Bertillon, yeah, inventing the mugshot system.
Yeah.
All about categorizing and identifying people, particularly repeat offenders.
And Francis Galton trying to create composite photos to find a criminal type.
Exactly. And again, the point the sources stress is this wasn't just bad science. It was a political act. It was about control, about marginalizing certain groups.
Okay, so that's the history, pretty grim stuff, but you might think that's the past. How does that flawed logic actually, show up in the AI we use today?
So think about how these AI systems are trained. They need massive data sets. ImageNet is a classic example.
Right, scraped from the internet, billions of photos.
Billions.
Yeah.
And then labeled, often by crowd workers. But that whole process, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It soaked up all the existing biases.
Biases in terms of who was photographed, how they were described, what labels were even available.
Precisely. And we see the results. Researchers like Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru did groundbreaking work showing this.
Their work on facial recognition, showing how much worse it performed on darker skin tones, especially women.
Which really forces the question, is this just a technical glitch, something we can just patch?
Or is it deeper?
The sources argue it's deeper. It's baked into the very act of classification. Who gets to decide which differences make a difference?
So attempts to debias the data, like adding more diverse faces, that might help a bit, but...
But it often doesn't challenge the underlying categories themselves. Are the categories themselves problematic? Like reinforcing a strict gender binary or using labels that are subjective, maybe even offensive.
Right. Just adding more data to flawed boxes doesn't fix the boxes.
And this is where it gets really quite chilling. Connecting that classification logic directly to state power. The sources talk about concepts like signature strikes.
Signature strikes.
Let's explain that a bit.
In a military context, it means targeting someone not necessarily because you know their exact identity, but based on their patterns of behavior, their metadata signature. Wow. There was that famous quote from General Michael Hayden.
Yeah, incredibly blunt. We kill people based on metadata. The sources really highlight how metadata becomes a proxy for identity, for life and death decisions.
And that logic, that AI scoring based on patterns, it's not just military anymore.
No, the sources show it bleeding into everyday state functions. Law enforcement using predictive policing, border control algorithms, even systems deciding access to social benefits.
Creating what the sources call a new regime of moralized social classification.
Exactly. And you see work like Virginia Eubank's automating inequality, documenting how these systems, often sold as objective, just math,
end up disproportionately harming the most vulnerable people.
Precisely. And then there's another layer. The huge commercial surveillance industry. Companies like Palantir, Vigilance Solutions.
Selling access to massive databases, right? License plate data, facial recognition tech, selling it to government agencies.
Yeah, which blurs the lines between private companies and state surveillance. And it risks shifting policing towards, well, almost military intelligence goals, often with very little transparency.
So these systems aren't neutral tools at all.
Far from it. They carry the weight of all these historical choices, these political decisions about who gets categorized, how, and ultimately who gets controlled.
Understanding that history, which these sources help us do, seems absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
We need to ask who holds the power to classify now in this digital age.
And what are the real-world consequences when algorithms inherit not just data, but that often problematic historical logic?
Yeah. Machines inheriting our past biases. Something to really think about.
Definitely.
This has been a quick overview. If you want to know more, check out our full episode on Study Hall wherever you get your podcasts.
That's your quick glimpse into today's full episode. If you want the full breakdown, the deep dives, and all the context we couldn't fit here, head over to the full episode of Study Hall, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
And while you're there, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay curious.